Hello everyone, this is Ijaz Khan and welcome to the debrief of SBL September 18 exam. Well, the objective of this debrief is to help you improve your reading skills, writing skills, and improve your ability to produce the solutions that the examiner is looking for. So I will not be discussing each and every component of the recommended solution as it's available to all of you, so you can go through that. So I'll just be going through the techniques that you should be using while solving your SBL exam. So definitely this case study is not going to be examined again. So there's no point of discussing every point in this case study with all of you. Rather than we should be discussing the techniques that will help you pass your exam. So first of all, as I have discussed previously as well, that you should have a plan for reading your case study so that you should read and understand more in less time. So the first thing that you should all do is to quickly read the requirements so that you get an idea of what is the scope of the case study, so that you should know that what exactly has been asked. Once you're done with the requirements, then you should be going through the brief introduction that will always be there at the start of the case study. And this particular area will help you identify the business of the company. And once you know what the business of the company is, you will know about the environment that it will be operating. Because for some businesses, you will always be aware of the business environment. So there will be many points that you may use, or the information you may use from your daily life. For example, in this particular case study, it's a construction company. So you'll know what the problems of a construction company may be, what the opportunities usually a construction company may have. So you will have some basic information available once you know that what the company's business is. So once you know the business from this paragraph, then there may be your role identified in this paragraph, not necessarily that your role in the company will be specified in this paragraph, but sometimes it may be specified in this paragraph and sometimes it may be in the requirements section. Then there may be a brief description of the organization structure of the company, that who is the CEO and who is the chairman, who is the finance director. So you'll know the structure of the organization as well. And then there will be a brief description of the problem or the situation of the business, which will help you understand each of the exhibits or the additional information given in the case study. So once you're done with this part, then you should read the brief description of each of the exhibits. And the description will basically help you link the exhibits with the requirements so that you have an idea of which exhibit will be helpful for which requirement. Not necessarily that each exhibit will be linked to one requirement. There may be multiple exhibits that you may need to solve a particular requirement. So do not restrict yourself to this thinking that one exhibit will be for one requirement. So keep this in your minds that there may be more than one exhibit that you may be required to use in a particular requirement. So exhibits, the brief description of the exhibits, link it with the requirements, and then go through all the exhibits to see what those exhibits are all about. And then come back to the first requirement. And it is highly recommended that you should solve the requirements in the order, because examiner will usually construct the case study in a progressive way. So one requirement, solving one requirement will basically be helping you solve the other requirement, and it will just be like a storytelling. So you cannot start a storytelling from the end of the story. So it should always be starting from the start. So it will always be a professional way of solving a case study. So solve it in order as much as possible. So come to the first requirement and then look at what this first requirement is all about and then start solving it. Now, once you've read the requirement, do not start solving it unless you have fully understood what has been asked. So let's go through the first requirement and see what it has for us. The first requirement is analyze. Okay, we have to prepare briefing paper. Now, this is related to the communication part of the syllabus. So briefing paper will have no specific format, remember. A briefing paper is basically a handwritten or it may be a typed document that you keep with yourself, and you do not usually hand it over to someone else for the communication's sake. You basically keep it with you. When you're going into a meeting or you have to give a briefing, you keep it with you so that you can look at it and then start discussing each of these points. These are basically reminders, you can say. It reminds you during the discussion what points you will be discussing. So it's basically for your own sake. So there will be no specific format for that, and it should always be containing brief points rather than long essays. So do not make a mistake of coming up with long essays. Just keep this thing in your mind that these are the pointers that you will be having in your hand once you're presenting anything in a meeting. So what this briefing paper is all about, it basically be analyzing the financial and non-financial issues which will affect the final decision of whether to accept the contract to build the road in detail. And you may have gone through the whole case study, so I'm not going through the case study as it will take a long time. So you know that this company, the CC, it's basically looking for a contract in a mountainous area in a new country where it has never worked before. So the country that it has worked before is a different one, and now it is considering to start a contract in a different country. Now the contract that it has undertaken previously were in flat places, so it currently has a different experience. But the country that it is going now is a mountainous country, and the road that it is going to build will be in between the mountains. So this is a slight background of what is going to happen. So what we need to do is to analyze the financial and the non-financial issues, that how the financial issues and the non-financial issues will be affecting the decision of whether the company should be going for this project or not. So remember, it has asked for both financial and non-financial issues. So this is the requirement. We'll go through one by one the points that you're supposed to know. Next thing is to note this one as well. A recommendation is not required. So you're not supposed to be telling at the end of the solution that whether the contract should be undertaken or not. It's just basically to identify the relevant points, both financial and non-financial, that will be affecting the decision. So you don't need to recommend it at the end of the question. So this is a very important part. Professional skills marks are available for demonstrating analysis skills. So analytical skills will be required, and luckily the requirement for technical marks and the requirement for the professional skills marks both are same. Next part discusses the difficulties CC company may face in fulfilling the criteria stated by Desmond Otieno, the Transport Minister of Beetle. So professional skills marks are available for commercial acumen. So commercial acumen is basically coming up with all the relevant factors that will be affecting a decision. So in this particular part, we have to come up with the with the difficulties that the company may face in fulfilling the criteria stated by this minister, and we'll discuss it. So let's move towards our let's move towards the other requirement that we're going to discuss in this video, and then we will go to each one in detail. The second requirement, it's basically prepare a memo addressed to Oliver Wesonga, which critically evaluates the outline content and the summary of operational issues in the project initiation document, which he has prepared, and recommends improvements. And the skills, professional skill marks are available for showing skepticism. So we'll discuss in detail. The third part is not related to my syllabus area, so I'm skipping it. The fourth one is again related to my part. It's basically we have to prepare 2 presentation slides, and these slides should be discussing the benefits and cost of investing in big data, and then it should also be evaluating the opportunity of undertaking a long-term infrastructure management. And the professional skills marks are available for showing communication skills. So So let's now look at these requirements one by one. So first of all, you need to understand the requirement, and this is a very important part of any exam that you are going to undertake, that you should be able to understand the requirement, because the marks are there for the requirement. So whatever the examiner is looking for, you should be producing that solution. So the requirement is briefing paper, which will be highlighting financial and non-financial factors which will be affecting the decision, and the analytical skills will be tested. So number one thing that you should note, as I discussed earlier, no specific format required, so don't bother about the format in this part of the question. The solution should focus both on financial and non-financial factors, and the examiner has said that majority of the students, they were not able to create a balance between financial and non-financial factors. So it's sometimes very easy to discuss the financial factors and ignore the non-financial factors, but the non-financial factors will equally be important as the financial factors. So you should have a balance between financial and non-financial factors. So you have to discuss the financial side, that is the cost, the revenues, the profitability, the profit margin, the net present value, the IRR, the payback, whatever is possible. And the non-financial factors as well, because the time constraint will also be very important in accepting or rejecting projects, and the difficulties, the other difficulties that the company may be facing. For example, the earlier experience is of working in flat places, whereas this is a mountainous place, and it will be a different experience altogether. So you should consider these facts. So these are the non-financial factors that should be considered. You should be able to link these factors to help the company take the right decision, but without recommendation, as the note was there, that you don't need to recommend any particular action. For example, you should not be ending up with telling the company whether it should be accepting the project or not. Now, what financial factors you were supposed to be considering in this question? Number one, the profit margin. And because why a profit margin will be important here? Because there was an indication, because they have stated a target of 8% of the profit margin. So it gives you an indication that you should be considering this point as well, because this is something that you have to compare the target with. Then highlighting the financial management techniques like NPV, sensitivity analysis. You are not supposed to calculate the NPV because you don't have the information in the question, but you should be highlighting this fact that the NPV may be used, because in a long-term contracts, NPV is a very, very good technique to evaluate a project's acceptability. Sensitivity analysis is also a very important technique to assess the risk involved in accepting and rejecting any project. Then the gearing, impact on the gearing, because the project needs $20 billion. It's a $20 billion project, so it will accordingly be needing capital, and that capital may be raised through debt financing, or it may be raised through shares. So the company should be considering the impact of raising this capital on its existing gearing ratio, so that it knows that to what level it can afford a financial risk. And also it should be considering the operational gearing, and should be able to assess its business risk as well. Um, Now, what other factors should be considered? Discussing the fact that the company has recently incurred a loss in a recent project. When you have just recently incurred a loss, you will be cautious for the next project that you're going to accept. So you should be considering this fact as well, that since the company has made a loss in its earlier project, so it should be a bit cautious about accepting a new project, especially when it does not have the experience of working in such a mountainous areas. So that's one part that should be discussed. Possibility of cost overrun, particularly because of mountainous area, possibility of timeline extension. And a construction project, especially, timeline is very important because projects, these are long-term projects, 3 years or 4-year projects, so or maybe longer. So these projects are very important from the time perspective, because uh, if there is a time extension in the project, it will significantly change the costs. There will be a lot of overheads involved, the salaries and all the stuff. So it's very important to consider the impact of the cost overrun due to the timeline being extended. Um, the company needs financing, so that's one thing that should be discussed, that how this financing should be raised, what its impact will be on its existing gearing, and this part of the question is basically related to your financial management technical knowledge. So you should get that knowledge from your financial management and discuss the merits and demerits, some extent the merits and demerits and the availability of the source of finance for the organization, but you don't have to go into a lot of details. And one of the criteria, one of the models that can be used in this question is the SAF models. To look at whether the project is suitable. Definitely, it will be suitable because it's a construction contract which the company, which is the prime business of the company. So suitability will not be an issue here. Acceptability, now when you're discussing the acceptability, it will be good to look at from the shareholders perspective whether they will be satisfied with the profit margin that this project is generating. What about the net present value, how the shareholders will be looking at the net present value of this project. So acceptability, and then comes the feasibility, which is about financial feasibility, like if do you have enough capital available to finance such a huge project. Then comes the feasibility with regards to acquiring the human resource capital. So feasibility should also be considered. So SAF model will be very helpful in evaluating the factors that will help you, whether that will help the company to decide whether the project should be accepted or not. The non-financial factor is a new country for the company, which will create cultural problems when dealing with local labor and suppliers. Very common problem that may arise whenever you're trying to enter into a new country. And the region is mountainous. It has been discussed quite a number of times. It may have a problem with an operations system that can handle a project of this size. Now, previously, it has the maximum size of the project that it has carried previously was of $10 billion, and now it's double the size of that project, which is $20 billion. So maybe the company. So since we don't have enough details available, but it should be looked at whether the company has an operational system that is capable enough to handle the operations of such a huge contract. The monitoring system, because the company is trying to bring a new operation system called Site Smart, but there's a time lag between bringing that new system. So this is also a very valid point to be considered. So what are the don'ts of this particular part? Repetition. If you look at the examiner report, he has mentioned that the students usually repeat the points unnecessarily. So you're not supposed to repeat the points unless and until that repetition helps you come up with a new point. So do not repeat. Reproducing the information, sometimes students, they just reproduce the information available in the case study rather than using that information, they just simply reproduce it. Forcing the solution to fit a model. Sometimes you may have a model in your mind and you may be thinking that you must be using this model. So sometimes what happens is that the student, instead of using the model to frame the question, they usually come up with a solution that will be forcefully using the model. So it should not be like that. You should see whether a model is required or not, whether the solution that you're looking for will be getting any help from using a model. If yes, use the model. Otherwise, it's not mandatory to use a model. Briefing notes were required, so no need to produce long essays. I discussed it previously as well. So let's move towards the next part of the same requirement, 1B. So the basic requirement in this question is to identify the difficulties. So there were a few criteria mentioned by the minister about the cost that they will be giving a contract to someone who will be helping the government save the costs. The time period, it will take less time for the contract to get completed, and the company will also be able to reduce the environmental impact, and the outputs will also be achieved. One of the outputs that was mentioned was that the journey will be traveled in half the time it is currently being traveled. So these were the things that were mentioned by the minister. So what our requirement is, we have to produce a solution that will help identify the difficulties in fulfilling this criteria. So we have to come up with how far the company is likely to meet this criteria, and what are the problems that it may face in fulfilling the criteria. So the first was the cost. So you have to discuss how much the company will be able to construct this. First of all, the company has to bid the lowest price. And then to ensure that it earns the required margin, it has to keep the cost low. So how far the company will be able to keep its cost at the lower side, provided that this is a mountainous area which it has never, in the area in which it has never worked before. Number one, how likely it is that the company will not be extending the timeline, because if it extends the timeline, it is again going to increase its cost. Then how far the estimates that have been given are correct. Again, this has to do with the area, the new area that is working, it is going to be working in. So these difficulties need to be expressed. Then if the company will be focusing too much on the cost element, then another problem may arise, which may be that the company has to make a choice between the quality and the cost. So if it has to make sure that the cost is at the lowest side, then it may have to compromise on the quality at times, especially when it has to choose between the lowest cost route and a route that will ensure a smooth flow of traffic. So sometimes it may have a choice of going for a route that is less costly, but may not be good for the smooth flow of the traffic. On the other hand, it may have a choice of going and selecting a route that is very good for a smooth flow of traffic, but it may be more costly to go for that route. So it has to make a choice. So how far the company is likely to make a choice of going for a low cost, Then comes the time period. How the company is going to make sure that the time period is not extended, because if it gets extended, it will also damage its reputation. Secondly, it will also increase its cost. The environmental impact, since the minister hasn't stated any specific criteria of what type of environmental impact it is he's worried about, but definitely how the environmental impact is going to be tackled by the company. This will be an issue. For example, if it has to reduce the time period, it may have to increase the amount of work, the speed of the work, and if it does so, it may put people into trouble. So this is another issue that the company will be looking at. And then comes the outcomes and the performance measurement. No, one of the outcomes that I discussed earlier was that the journey time will be reduced to half of what it is currently. So we have to discuss this point, that how this estimation has been made, how the government thinks that this new route is going to reduce the time to half of the time that it is currently there. So this is the point that should be discussed. So common possible mistakes. Number one, just discussing the criteria. Now, you were not supposed to discuss the criteria. You were supposed to discuss the points or the difficulties that will be stopping the company for fulfilling the criteria. Then identifying the conflicts between different criteria. Maybe the students fail to identify the problems or the conflicts between different criteria. Like I was told, that if you have to choose between you have to choose the cost. So if you want to produce the low cost route, then you may have to compromise on the quality. Similarly, if you are trying to save your time, then you may have to spend extra cost. You have to hire extra labor, more efficient, more skilled labor, and it may increase your cost because you are trying to save your time. So there will be conflicts between different measures as well, which need to be mentioned. Question 2. It was relatively a simple part. If anyone who knows about what the project initiation document is, PID is, it would have been a very straightforward question for that student. So I will recommend all of you to go through the article about communication skills available on ACCA's website. Do go through that, in which all the communication formats have been discussed. So if you go through that document, it will help you a lot to know about the different communication formats, and PID is one of them. So again, it required a particular format, which was prepare a memo. And in this memo, what we were supposed to do is we were supposed to critically evaluate the outline, contents, and summary of operational issues in project initiation document. So they're basically, one of the requirements is to critically evaluate the outline contents and also critically evaluate the summary of operational issues. But we are also required to provide recommendations for improvements in these areas. Maybe there are few omissions. Maybe we think that there are a few points that should have been mentioned, but the Oliver Wesonga has omitted those requirements. So we may have to recommend what to do to improve this PIT. So let me quickly go through the problems that were highlighted by the examiner. Number one, few students did not know about the PID at all. So this is something that you should be working on. If you haven't seen your PID at the moment, you go through the communication formats, and you can also go through my lecture on project management, in which I have discussed the PID format. A few students who knew about PID only listed down the full contents of the PID rather than discussing the contents produced in the PID. So they just generally discussed what contents are there in a PID rather than what contents have been produced by the person in the question. So you were supposed to critically evaluate the contents produced rather than the journal contents. There were a few things that students should have. There are a few things that should have been there in the PID, but were not there and were not identified by the students. Like, you know that if you are going for a project management and you are preparing the PID, you have to prepare assumptions, because when we start working, we assume few situations. Like this is we may be assuming, for example, if you are going to play a cricket match. So if you are planning for a cricket match, you may be assuming that there will be no rain expected. So this is the assumption that you've made, because assumption when we are coming with a plan, we assume certain situations, and the plan will only be successful when those assumptions are true. So preparing the PID will give an idea to anyone who is going through the PID document that what assumptions are there and what needs to be there in order for this plan to be successful. Now, memo format, which was clearly stated there, was not used. Again, I would recommend to go through the communication formats. And a third-party tone was used rather than a direct tone was used. You were supposed to be directly communicating to this staff member, and you should be directly communicating with that staff member. So you should not be using an indirect tone in this part of the question. A few students, they gave recommendations for improving the layout. Good, but this was half done. They did not give. Sorry, a few students, they gave recommendations for improving the layout, which was not required at all. You're not supposed to comment on the layout or identifying the problems, what was there on the layout. The exact requirement was to critically evaluate the contents in the question, that whether these contents should have been there, what contents were missing, or the contents that were mentioned there, were they up to the mark? So this was what was required. Then one more part that other exhibits should have been used for relevant information, like information about risk. So when you're trying to producing a solution for a particular requirement, as I told you earlier, that you should be using information from other exhibits as much as possible. And this is what the good thing about the SBL is, that SBL is all inclusive paper. So you cannot exclude any information just because it was in any other exhibit. You should look at all the information like you are solving a problem in your real life. Question 4. Again, it was a very straightforward part. You were supposed to come up with 2 presentation slides. So the communication format is there. You have to prepare slides. Definitely, you don't have to come up with a PowerPoint slide, but you have to give a heading for the slide, and then you have to come up with the bullet points like we do in a PowerPoint slide. So you have to highlight the key points on that slide, and it should not be more than 4 points in one slide. So one slide should be for the costs and benefits of investing in big data analytics, and second is slide is for evaluating the possible opportunity to undertake long-term infrastructure management of roads. So first of all the communication format should be used. You have to use the communication format, that is presentation slides. So this is the first thing that you should be keeping in your mind. Slides should be bulleted and should be followed by supporting notes. Separate slides should be prepared, as I told you earlier. So now, you are not supposed to come up with the benefits and cost of big data analytics in general. You have to be very specific to the company situation, that how using big data analytics will help this construction company to improve its profitability or enhance its efficiency while maintaining the different routes for which it has contracted. So how big data is going to help the company, you have to be specific to the situation of the company. And secondly, in the second part, you have to tell how beneficial it is for this company to get involved into the long-term infrastructure management of roads. Now, one of the benefits will be that it's a diversification, it's providing new service. Number 2, it will also help the company gain construction contracts. For example, if you're a construction company and you're offering the construction of the road along with the maintenance of the road. So this is going to help you get that construction contract as well. Like if you're trying to buy a cell phone from a company and it also offers a service warranty, so there's more chance that you will buy from such a company. Similarly, if any company who offers the construction of the road along with the maintenance of the road, it is more likely to get that contract. So there are other benefits as well. Just go through the solution. So we were supposed to highlight the main points that you were supposed to be discussing in this part of the question. And I hope this debrief will help you improve and help you pass your exams. So in the end, I would just like to add few points that once you're solving the SBL case study, remember a few points. You're not supposed to reproduce the information. You have to apply the information that you have to the situation that is given in the question. That information which you have may be a very generic information. It may not have been obtained from the textbooks. It may be your own work experience. You may be applying that. As long as you're able to solve the problem given in the question, you will get maximum marks. If you have a lot of information, but you're not able to solve the problem in the question, then this is going to put you in trouble. So make sure that you use your information to solve the problem in the question. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.